Hello, my name is Barbara Kutzner and I'm the agronomist for DEKALB here in California and Arizona. Today we are talking about the optimal timing for silage harvest. We have relative maturities assigned to all our hybrids. Those relative maturities are the first two digits of the hybrid number plus 50, but those are actually maturities that go to black layer, which would be more applicable to grain products. For silage, you would chop these products about 10 to 14 days earlier. But these are just very, very rough estimates because depending on when you plant these products, the days to maturity can really vary widely. If you plant really early and you have very slow GDU accumulation early, it takes more days than if you planted those crops later in the season when it's warm. A better way to estimate the days to harvest are actually GDUs, and for a full season silage hybrid here in California, it takes about 2,600 GDUs to get to half milk line. Another way to estimate days to half milk line is that it takes about 25 to 35 days to get from blister to half milk line. But I don't really particularly like these things to estimate. You really have to go into your crop and look at your ears and see how much they have dented. So one question that we get every year is, when do we actually time the last irrigation? And it is a little bit tricky. And so I would recommend that you go into your crop and you look at your ears. And if the ears are just forming a little milk line, which is the separation line between the milky and the more solid starch content, then you look at your overall plant appearance. If you still have nice and green plants, then I would say apply one more irrigation. Of course, it all depends. It depends on if you have sandy soils or if you have more clay soils that hold a lot more water, and if you have plenty of moisture in your ground and you have heavy soils, maybe you do not have to apply a last irrigation. But that is when you really think about it, because you want to make sure that that ear comes to maximum grain fill. And if you cut off the water too early, you force that ear into early maturity, and then you lose starch, which is of course extremely important to your overall silage quality. So when we talk about the ultimate silage harvest, once these the kernel and the plant are mature, then you look at whole plant moisture, and the whole plant moisture that we are shooting for really depends on if you have a drive over silo or if you have an egg bag. For a drive over silo, the whole plant moisture should be between 65 and 70% moisture. For an egg bag, you can err a little bit more on the dry side, so that optimal range is actually from 60 to 70% moisture. So we will later on go over different ways of determining the moisture, but just as a rule of thumb, if you are harvesting too wet, you will have losses of dry matter. You have all seen piles where you have a puddle of moisture at the bottom of the pile. And that is not just water, that actually includes soluble protein, soluble sugar. Ultimately, you are losing dry matter and feed. If you err on the dry side, and that can happen very, very fast when it's very, very hot at the end of the season, if you have mite infestation and all of a sudden your silage becomes too dry, like drier than 60%. And in that case, you have trouble packing the silage properly. You have trouble excluding the oxygen, and that makes for improper fermentation. And especially when you open these piles, you have those pockets of dry matter in there, and molds need oxygen to grow, and then you are facing the danger of having molds that are producing mycotoxins. And as the name would suggest, they are producing toxins that can be toxic to your livestock, to the cows, and they might not die, but they are depressed in dry matter intake, they might be depressed in milk production. So it is definitely something that has wide-reaching repercussions for your quality and for your yield.
Hi, I'm Becca Mellema. I am the field sales representative for DEKALB in Central California. I'm going to follow up off of Barbara's introduction on harvest timing and moisture and show you guys a quick and dirty tip on how to look at overall plant moisture in the field. Like Barbara said, the starter for it is going in that field, pulling in a couple of ears, breaking them in half, looking at the top half of the cob and looking at where that moisture, where that starch line is. So you want it to be about halfway traveling from the outside of the kernel towards the cob. Once it is about halfway, that's when we want to pull some stalks and look at that overall moisture on the plant and when we know we want to harvest or not. So a way to do that is to pull some stalks and to do a quick twist of the stalk to look at where that moisture line is in it. So you just take the stalk, you start twisting it. What you do not want to see is if there's actual moisture dripping out of the stalk, which on this one it is. That means we're still well above 70% moisture. What you do want to see is just as you're twisting it, that stalk showing a little bit of shininess. That's a very good indicator. And if it's not showing any shininess at all, that means it is much too dry. So that's just a quick dirty tip for you guys to check infield moisture and to give a better indication of harvest timing.
Hi, I'm Jason Mast, and today we're going to talk about a couple of things that you can check while harvesting to make sure that your silage is going into that pit just as optimum as possible. So my coworker Becca is going to take it away, first talking about kernel processing.
Okay guys, one thing to do, like Jason said, to check while you're harvesting is going to the pile and checking on what some people call just the KP or the kernel processing from the choppers. So we have this nice 1 liter cup, and one way to do this is taking this whole cup. We've just got this bucket full of water and I'm going to dump this silage in the bucket. We are going to let this process for a while Jason goes over a few more things, but what's going to happen is the kernels are going to sink to the bottom and the rest of the stalk and leaves are going to float to the top. We'll sift that off of the top and we're going to want to count how many kernels are at the bottom, and what we're going to be looking for is that the kernels are cracked. We don't want to see any whole kernels. If there's maybe 1 to 2 whole kernels in here, then we're doing okay, but we definitely don't want to see any more than that. So that's what we're going to be looking for over here.
We've talked quite a bit about moisture, and there's a lot of ways to check moisture after you started harvesting. The most common method that we see is through a kosher tester like this here. A lot of guys also use a microwave. You can send it off to a lab for a quick analysis through a laboratory as well. But it's important then to get a good fine-tuned moisture once you've started harvesting, just to make sure that you're off to the right start. So this is a kosher tester. All it is a heat element with a fan that's just blowing air through this cup. It's got a screen in the bottom to allow it to dry this. We're going to weigh out a 100-gram sample here and use that then to measure the moisture loss. We got our 100-gram sample weighed out, and from that point then we're just going to go ahead and set it on the heating element and let that sit until all the moisture has been dried out of that sample. We're going to go ahead and reweigh it as through the process. Usually this takes 20 to 30 minutes, roughly in that time frame, in order to get a good sample cooked. Be able to subtract how much moisture we've lost and calculate our moisture percentage. It's a very accurate, very common way to do this. The other thing then that we're able to do is the Penn State shaker box test to determine the length of cut. This is very important to make sure that we're able to get that optimum rumen health with some long particle fiber, while also not leaving too long a particle length so that we can't get good packing on that pit.
Okay, before Jason pours in our silage sample into this Penn State shaker box, I wanted to show you guys the different levels. So there's 4 different levels. This top level has the biggest holes in it. The second one's got medium size, and Jason's going to help me out with showing the last 2. So that way...
The bottom layer is solid, there are no holes.
So that way, as I show you guys, as we shake through the box, the smaller particles, of course, make it their way all the way down to the bottom, and that's how we're going to calculate a percentage from each level. So I'm going to let Jason pour the samples in.
We want to pull about 3 pints total. Spread them across the box evenly. And then we're going to go ahead and do 40 full shakes of this, not lifting it all, but sliding it sideways across the table.
Yep, this is how you'll do it, and you'll do it in increments of 5 before you do a quarter turn each time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, folks, we've got 40 shakes here, and we are going to weigh out each one.
We can pull all those numbers together to get our percentages of the different particle sizes, make sure that we're working with our nutritionists to ensure optimum rumen health, optimum particle length for our cows. You know, we want to have plenty of long particle fiber for those cows to have good healthy rumens, at the same time not have too long of particles that we can't effectively pack our silage. There's a fine line there, so work with your custom harvester and your nutritionist to make sure that you're meeting those targets to have safe and healthy feed for your cows.
So now we're back at the kernel processing station, and I am getting all of this stover, all the stalks and leaves off the top, everything that's risen to the top of this bucket. And we're going to have, of course, some of it that probably sunk to the bottom, but all of our kernels on the bottom as well. So I'm going to clean this up good, and I'm then going to pour, and with Jason's help, the rest of the water through this strainer so that way it catches those kernels, and then we can count it out. So Jason just helped me pour the rest of what was in the bucket that had sunk to the bottom through this strainer. So we still got a little bit of stover in here, but normally we would want to dump this out. But on first glance, when I'm looking through this, you can see lots of broken up kernels. It's a very good sign. I'm not seeing any whole kernels right now at all. So like I said from the beginning, we want to see less than 2 whole kernels. And as we're sifting through this, it looks like we're in good shape and that there was very good kernel processing.
We're going to come back and pull the final weights. Our kosher tester's been cooking for about a half hour. We're going to go ahead and pull the final weights, and as you can see here, this silage is nice and dry. It's ready to go, so we want to carefully come back to our scale, zero it out, weigh our final sample, and calculate our moisture loss, and that's going to tell us our dry matter. So with that, thank you for tuning in. Hope you guys found this insightful. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to give us a call. Have a great afternoon.